Welcome to Driving a Growth Agenda, a special Art of Procurement series in partnership with Ivalua, where we explore how procurement leaders can help their organizations focus on the top line as well as the bottom line. My name is Philip Heights, the host of Art of Procurement, and in today's second episode in our four-part series, I'll talk with Vishal Patel, the VP of Product Marketing at Ivalua. And today we explore the role of suppliers in driving an organization's growth agenda and the role that procurement can play to facilitate and accelerate supplier contributions. Now, before I start, I do want to let you know that we created a printable one-page cheat sheet to accompany this series, which includes the 5 questions to ask yourself as you consider how you can help drive a growth agenda, 4 different growth levers that procurement can pull, and a summary of all the procurement foundations that we took from this series that you must build to be able to deliver growth for your organization. You can download that today at artofprocurement.com/growth series. That's all one word. That's artofprocurement.com/growth series. Okay, so let's go straight into the conversation. And I start by asking Vishal to share some of the ways that he sees suppliers bring value that goes beyond the transactional relationship of supplying to specification.
Yeah, great question. I think suppliers, the way I like to think about procurement often, if I can start there, is they're sort of a gateway to this huge resource that are a company's suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
And if I think about value and innovation and growth, I mean, there's and you compare sort of the innovation capacity that a company has and the innovation capacity of its suppliers, right? There's a big, usually
Right.
untapped resource there. Um, I think suppliers in a lot of our customers' cases, they really collaborate super well with suppliers to launch new products faster, to launch products more profitably,
Mm-hmm.
to enter new markets. So there's so many ways I think that suppliers can bring value to businesses. If they're working in a collaborative manner towards a similar direction.
Now, as you think about, tying that to growth, this series is really all about growth and how we as procurement professionals can help our organizations grow. What are some of the ways that you've seen organizations that you work with kind of look at how they can tie those suppliers and whether that's supplier enabled innovation or perhaps other things that they're able to do with the suppliers to the growth objectives of their organization, even figuring out what those growth objectives are before knowing where to tie it in and where to tie suppliers in?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Your last point is, assuming that the procurement organizations really want to be aligned with those business goals.
Mm-hmm.
And in one case, we have a customer, like a tier two automotive company, that as a company they were sort of facing stagnating growth, and they had a goal to be a much larger company through acquisition, through
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of strategies they had. But one of their goals was really to bring more new products to market and do so in a more profitable way.
Yeah.
And they had a big challenge because they went from launching one new product in 5 or 6 years to launching 20 in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the process change and the level of collaboration they had to have with their suppliers, and even working with the suppliers to define the right process to launch products more effectively, right? So they actually used our solution and used the technology to create what they called a supplier launch process. Um, and it was a collaborative way to work with their suppliers from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
to keep track of their margins, to keep track of costs, to keep track of timing, and make sure that they are launching more products more profitably. And it actually had a big impact on the company financially, and even impacted their stock price ultimately, and
Right.
changed the trajectory of the company, really.
Do you find that having that, that having a conversation around growth actually opens doors for procurement, when it comes to either seeking relevancy or impact or even investment in the function?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we can, as a function, we can keep talking about savings, but that's kind of part of the job now, and
Mm-hmm.
you figure out how do you use those savings in different ways, or how do you build the relationships with suppliers, and stakeholders in better ways. Um, Another example of is just thinking about the impact to the company by way of margin, right? So what does it mean when a huge amount of savings is achieved? What
Yeah.
does that mean for what you might have had to do in terms of revenue growth to achieve
Yeah.
that same result? And we have a good example of a healthcare system that they saved $140 million through various things they did in procurement and supply chain.
Hmm.
And if they were to have the same margin impact by growing revenue, they would have had to grow revenue by over $1 billion
Wow.
because of the percentage of margin that they
Yeah.
they have, right? So it's you can look at it things that way as well. Um, but from a procurement standpoint, I think that when you talk about aligning with the business, and next year we're hoping, I think everyone's hoping that the conversation will change from um, you know damage control to restoring growth.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we can, as procurement, that's a conversation you want to have
Yeah.
with your leadership, but also with your supplier community, right? Like, how are you going to, or how should we all plan to um, be better prepared for the growth that's
Yeah.
coming, and not sort of just stay focused on um, you know what happens when this comes around next time, or things like that. But I think, yeah, the growth conversation is definitely a critical one.
Yeah, it kind of keeps procurement professionals, procurement organizations, um, relevant at all times of the business cycle, as opposed to let's bring them out when we need some expense management, and then perhaps put them away again in the box until that time the cycle comes around again. I got a question that, because you talked a little bit about collaboration, to kind of build on that, and suppliers. Um, traditional segmentation models in procurement will look and say, these are my strategic suppliers in this top box, and these are my like non-strategic, non-critical suppliers in the bottom. And we tend to kind of forget those that don't appear in the top of a matrix box. And I just wonder if, when we're thinking about the types of suppliers we should be looking to collaborate with, is that a way that we should still think about it, or do you look at all suppliers as being suppliers we can collaborate with and bring innovation?
So, I mean, I think when we think about our sort of connecting to suppliers, or from a technology standpoint, I think it's important to consider all suppliers, right? Because
Mhm.
for example, you could have very few transactions with a small supplier every now and then, but those transactions may be the ones that costing you
Right.
a huge amount of resource and time. So from that sense, I think it makes sense sort of to electronically enable and interact with your suppliers, all suppliers.
Hmm.
Strategic suppliers, I think by nature, are just going to be a select few, because I don't think it's possible to have a strategic and collaborative relationship with a huge number of
Yeah.
parties, right? I think those have to be very selective, and in the best interest of both
Hmm.
organizations. But then there's also this other, and depending on your business. So we have, for example, we work with a large bank in Europe. We work with many large banks, but one of them, as banking is facing so many uh, innovation and fintech challenges, right, in the market. They're being driven to come up with new solutions that are more advanced
Yeah.
technologically. And
Yeah.
we all know banks are kind of slow, but they can catch up quick. So
Hmm.
these guys, from a procurement standpoint, set up an entirely new way to work with startup suppliers,
Right.
because their bank process was so long and so difficult and complex, and so many forms and so many approvals, that it was not, a startup is not going to spend 3 months doing that, because that 3 months means sort of life
That's
or death for that,
3 months
for
of
that.
cash flow or
Yeah.
revenue generation that,
So
when you've got a short runway.
exactly, or it means I'm going to work with the one that's going to get me
Yeah.
on in 2 weeks, not 3 months.
Yeah.
So they actually set up a whole entire onboarding flow for startups that is faster contracting, faster reviews, proof of concept,
Hmm.
and kind of getting to the yes no decision much faster. And it worked well for them.
Yeah, that's a great example of being a customer of choice, and thinking about how can you make it easier for people to work with your organization, for people to want to work with your organization. And do you see that as being a differentiator for a lot of companies when it comes to, collaborating with those more innovative suppliers? Is how can we be attractive as an organization to want to work with versus, hey, we're the big guys, you want to work with us, you're going to have to jump through the hoops that we set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and yeah, I mean, some of it comes down to basics. Like, are you a company that's paying on time, and
Yeah.
are you sort of easy to do business with? Um, but for the innovative suppliers, think about it. You're being selective which suppliers you're strategically collaborating with,
Mm-hmm.
and by nature, that's making them selective as well. So you're either in that in that group, or you're kind of out of that group, right?
Yeah.
So, and the supplier has to make a decision as well for their business, right? They have to decide how profitable is this relationship for me? What does this do for the future of our company? What am I
Mm-hmm.
getting from them, right? It's not only what I'm providing them, how are they helping me develop my offering as
Yeah.
well? So I think it goes, it's not even that much about the company. Yeah, so there's some basics, right? Like, you want to position yourself as the better company to work with, but what are you doing to support that supplier as well?
Mm-hmm.
I think it will come to that as well.
Yeah, so many of these companies that are innovative companies that are leading the way, they've only got finite resources, haven't they? So they've got to select, and maybe they want to work with everybody because that gives them the path to obviously increase revenue, but they've got to do that in small steps. So they're going to use their finite resources to work with those who they think the best return is going to come from as well. And as a large supplier, you don't necessarily have the monopoly on selecting which of those innovative suppliers you want to work with if you're not attractive to work with.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Now, as you think about once an innovative supplier and you're working with that innovative supplier and kind of you getting the relationship started, I just wonder if you've got any tips of how to increase the impact of that relationship at a working level, like an operational level. Like, what are some of the things that you can do once you are in partnership to really get the most out of that relationship as quickly as possible?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I've seen companies. So you've kind of decided that this is a supplier you're going to collaborate with more strategically. Um, many organizations have like a very formal sort of innovation program, right, where
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be very structured about it, and I'm going to invite certain suppliers. They're going to share ideas. We're going to have workshops. We're going to have supplier days, and so on. Um, but I do think at some level it does have to be structured, and you want to have a clear view of where that supplier is adding value, and be fairly
Yeah.
specific, I think, about what it is that they're going to do. It's not just sort of innovation in quotes, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like, here, I'm going to help you with this particular
Yeah.
product because
Yeah.
you have this goal to be more sustainable and more environmentally friendly, and this is the solution I can give you.
Yeah.
And then I think it's about showing the impact of that over the over some life cycle of that relationship, right? So we've done this for a year, and this is what has happened as a result.
Yeah.
And I think doing that more gets people more excited about partnering with such suppliers as well.
Yeah, it kind of drives the story and being able to sell it internally and demonstrating actual impact from it. So Vishal, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today to talk about the role that suppliers can play in the growth, especially as we look for growth in 2021. They play such an important role. And as you said, I want to bring it right back to something you said at the beginning, how the innovation capability and capacity within our supply base far outstrips anything that even the largest of companies that invest in R&D have access to internally. And it's our job as procurement to really enable that, to embrace it, and to really, integrate that into our organizations. So
Absolutely.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thanks, Vishal. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We created a printable one-page cheat sheet to accompany this series, which includes the 5 questions to ask yourself as you consider how you can help drive a growth agenda, 4 growth levers that procurement can pull, and a summary of the procurement foundations you must build to deliver growth. It's all the information we pulled together into one page from this series. You can download that today at artofprocurement.com/growth series. That's artofprocurement.com/growth.